This is my second video against OnceForgivenNowFree's challenge to atheists regarding the claim that one's brain having been intelligently designed is supposed to be a prerequisite for rationality. OnceForgivenNowFree did not really respond to that video, but I do know that he watched it because he did leave a couple of comments. YouTuber Thunderf00t also made a response to him, to which he has responded in a video. I need to make clear that it's not my intention to speak on Thunderf00t's behalf, nor do I feel the need to do so. But of course I do need to take into account what Thunderf00t said in his response, because that is the context in which OnceForgivenNowFree is presenting his claims. There are essentially 4 subtopics that I will address in this video. 1. OnceForgivenNowFree's dilemma regarding the belief in God as a false belief in an atheistic universe, with brains being the product of evolutionary processes. 2. The relation between physics, chemistry and rational thought. 3. The claim that libertarian free will is a prerequisite for rationality. And 4. The meaning of free thinking and wasting one's life. After that, I want to address the comments OnceForgivenNowFree left on my previous video and provide him with some challenging questions of my own.
A few months ago, I issued a challenge to atheists, asking them if their brain was intelligently designed. Here is Thunderf00t's response.
So was my brain intelligently designed? Well, it's an evolutionary design.
And so the simple answer is no. Thunderf00t does not believe that his brain was intelligently designed. However, he thinks that his thoughts and his beliefs are still reliable because evolution apparently gave him a trustworthy brain.
So no, it's not an intelligent design. It's an evolutionary design. And because of that, you can mostly trust it. Because what has been selected for is something that does have a rudimentary predictive understanding of the universe, or truth as you would call it.
Now, Thunderf00t asserts that our brains were selected for understanding the universe, or for truth. But of course this is false. It's survival of the fittest, not survival of those whose beliefs best correspond with reality. After all, if evolution gave us a brain that was reliable in understanding the universe, then why do most people believe God exists? I mean, if you ask around, the majority of people are convinced that God exists. So you're in a lose-lose situation. If you want to claim that atheism is true, then you have to believe that evolution has provided the majority of us with minds that believe in God. But if that's the case, that means that evolution has selected for false beliefs. And if evolution selects for false beliefs, then why should you trust your own thoughts?
OnceForgivenNowFree is using the same strawman as he did in his original video. And I can comfortably call it a strawman rather than a misunderstanding, since I specifically addressed this in my previous response, which OnceForgivenNowFree has seen. So he cannot claim ignorance on this. He is again claiming that if atheism, or rather physicalism, is true, and this is paired with an evolutionary origin of the human brain, then our beliefs are the result of natural selection. This is incorrect, as natural selection cannot select for individual beliefs. We are not born with beliefs pre-programmed, so to say. Nor are our beliefs the direct result of our genes. In other words, not only are our beliefs not the result of natural selection, beliefs cannot be naturally selected for, even in principle, as beliefs are not genetic traits that can be passed on through sexual reproduction. OnceForgivenNowFree is presenting a strawman, and therefore his dilemma is a false dilemma. If OnceForgivenNowFree, however, wants to claim that he is not being deceitful, he would need to defend the premise that if physicalism and an evolutionary history of the human brain are true, then beliefs would have to have been naturally selected for their survival value. Given that this premise is foundational to his claim that intelligent design is a prerequisite for rationality. OnceForgivenNowFree also misunderstood or misrepresented what Thunderf00t's claim was. Thunderf00t referred to what has been naturally selected for, namely a brain with the ability to analyze its surroundings in order to make predictions. I don't think his depiction of a hunter hitting its target with a spear and the other hunter missing it was accidental. He also made clear that this is a rudimentary understanding of our surroundings. This is precisely what I claimed in my previous response. Our brains are biological problem-solving machines. OnceForgivenNowFree also misunderstands what survival of the fittest means. Being more fit to survive in a hostile environment can be expressed in multiple ways. It may mean stronger muscles, sharper claws, or better analytical abilities to make predictions and to use the environment to one's advantage. Humans are relatively weak without many biological defenses like claws or high speed. What makes us successful at surviving is our analytical abilities. That is what natural selection has selected for in humans. But when it comes to beliefs, we need input from the environment, reflection, experience and interaction with other humans to form accurate beliefs. We need to test our beliefs, correct them if necessary, and gain new information to expand our beliefs. A baby is born ignorant, and if you place it in a dark room with only the bare essentials for survival, it will remain ignorant. We are born with the potential for rationality. We need to develop this during our lives. Moreover, we require other human beings in order to accumulate acquired and tested data. Thunderf00t often speaks of standing on the shoulders of giants so that we can see even farther than they could. Which is very true. We benefit from the accumulated wisdom of our ancestors. And this is an ongoing process. Future generations will have a better understanding of the world than we do. The most important thing about this is the fact that none of this depends on which of our worldviews is true. Even if our brains were intelligently designed, that design included nothing more than the analytical abilities we start out with. Rationality is still contingent upon what happens to our brains after that, namely the data we acquire, reflect upon, test and accumulate throughout successive generations in order to improve our understanding of the world. So this understanding is neither the result of natural selection nor of design. Your dilemma is therefore utterly nonsensical. The belief in God could not even in principle be a false belief that was naturally selected for due to its survival value. And in neither of our worldviews do we have perfect understanding without any false beliefs. We both believe that our brains are generally reliable, but far from perfect. We are naturally biased, recognize faces where none exist, have several psychological barriers which make acquiring accurate beliefs more difficult, we can forget, we can misperceive, make errors in reasoning, etc. Neither of us believe that false beliefs are not to be expected. I made this clear in my previous video, which you have watched, so I wonder which of these scenarios is true. You disagree, but fail to defend or even address one of the most essential premises in your so-called challenge. You are knowingly presenting a straw man, or you don't care enough about your arguments to properly defend them. So in response to your false dilemma, let me present you with this trilemma. Are you incompetent, dishonest, or lazy? OnceForgivenNowFree isn't actually making an argument or accounting for rationality, he's asserting things, which unfortunately is also the case regarding the other points in this video.
But that's only the tip of the iceberg. Thunderf00t, and atheism in general, has a much bigger problem. As I briefly explained before, and so your thought process is simply the outworking of the laws of physics and chemistry. To which Thunderf00t responded,
Yeah, that's right, it is. The laws of physics and chemistry.
And here we have the problem. But first, let's go over the part where you misrepresent me and imply that I don't believe in biochemistry, and that I don't believe that we're biological replicators, which is completely false. Here's how you put it.
I mean, if you really don't believe in biochemistry on this level, then please, by all means, be the first to show us that a man doesn't need to breathe to keep living. There are other subtle clues to the fact that you are, like every other mammal on this planet, a biological reactor.
Now, I most certainly do believe that we have biological bodies and that physics and chemistry play a role in who we are. All creationists believe this. So my point here is simply that physics and chemistry don't play the entire role. Alright, note that they don't play no role at all, or I'm not saying that they don't matter, but that they only play a part. There is more to us than just matter. We're more than just flesh and blood. Thunderf00t has misrepresented me by giving us a false dilemma. Either you accept that we are 100% predetermined by physics and chemistry, or else you reject physics and chemistry. But this is complete nonsense. There's actually three possibilities. One, sheer determinism, which would follow from the view that everything is predetermined by physics and chemistry. Or two, we could be semi-transcendent, which is my view of humans, where we have both a physical body but also an immaterial soul, and we can rise above deterministic nature and make choices and think rationally and have moral accountability. And third, we could have total transcendence, which would mean, of course, absolute objectivity, which is obviously something none of us have. Ironically, Thunderf00t's beliefs fall under the first view of sheer determinism, where knowledge is impossible and any statements he makes cannot have any objectivity since it is completely predetermined by natural laws. See, Thunderf00t believes that we are biological robots, but if everything we do is governed by the laws of physics and chemistry, then we don't have free will. We can't make choices. Free will would just be an illusion.
I'm afraid you are missing the point entirely. Claiming that our thought process is merely the result of the laws of nature and chemistry only has meaning if you can not only demonstrate that there is more to our brains than chemistry, biology and other natural processes, but that whatever addition you propose plays an active role in thought and reason, how it plays that role, why this addition is required, and how you know it is there rather than it merely being an empty assertion. You believe in substance dualism, which means that you believe that we have both a brain and a soul. I believe we merely have physical brains. Now, if you want to claim that some sort of immaterial addition is required for rationality, or perhaps even for any thought at all, then you need to demonstrate what this immaterial addition is capable of by itself, together with the brain, and what the brain is capable of by itself, if you of course believe it to be capable of anything without being connected to the soul. Now, is this merely the supposed ability to make libertarian free decisions? Is that literally all that the soul adds to the brain in your worldview? It's fine if it is, because then I can move on to the topic of free will. But I sincerely doubt that you believe the soul to be nothing more than a free will adding entity. The point is that perception, memory, personality, awareness and thought itself can be demonstrated to at least require a physical brain, even if it's the case that it's not sufficient for these abilities by itself, as damaging the brain inevitably affects or even destroys these abilities. I take it that you agree that perception, memory, personality, awareness and thought are required for rationality. If you believe that a physical brain is sufficient for this, then I'm completely fine with that, and you would be the first substance dualist I've heard of to believe this. But if you believe that a soul can, to whatever extent, perceive, remember, have personality traits, be self-aware and has the ability to think, and without this entity a brain cannot do these things, then you need to demonstrate how it does these things, at least a rudimentary understanding of it, how it differs from the brain in the sense of what makes it capable of these things when the brain is incapable of these things, and why any brain at all is required for, well, for anything. In fact, I ended my original video with these kinds of questions regarding God. God has no brain and is not intelligently designed, but you believe him to be the ultimate rational being. However, you claim that humans require an intelligently designed brain, if you indeed believe humans require a brain in the first place. You need to stop asserting that you have a foundation for rationality in your worldview and start accounting for it. First of all, I found it curious how you made the jump to free will in relation to chemistry and Thunderf00t's supposed false dilemma, when he made no claims regarding free will in his entire video. He was talking about chemical processes in our bodies in general and our brains specifically. You yourself made the jump to free will. Secondly, you operate on the false understanding that opponents of libertarian free will acknowledge the epistemic possibility of libertarian free will, but believe physicalism to be a factor that prevents it to be exemplified in human beings or other animals. But this is incorrect, or at least very uncommon, because the main attack on libertarian free will is the incoherency of the concept. Scientific additions like specific experiments, neuroscientific understanding of brain functions and the operations of natural laws are in the end merely additions to the case against libertarian free will, which at its core is the incoherency of the concept coupled with philosophical arguments that attack the coherency or its potential explanatory power or functioning. like the regression problem or the insufficiency of indeterminism to account for libertarian free will. In other words, the mere addition of an immaterial entity that transcends specific deterministic natural processes does nothing to account for libertarian free will. If you believe that a soul can account for free will, you need to actually account for this. If you cannot, then even if you are correct that libertarian free will is required for rationality, then you still have given no reason why the source of such an ability is or even could be an immaterial soul. But the claim that libertarian free will is required for rationality is demonstrably false. We do not and cannot choose our beliefs. I cannot choose to believe that the Earth is flat. I need reasons to believe that this is the case. Those reasons would be the cause of me changing my belief in a round Earth to a belief in a flat Earth. And I would have no control over this. Either those reasons convince me or they do not convince me. Being rational means that you are able to distinguish good reasons from bad reasons and are capable of applying the rules of logic to assess arguments and evidence. And of course to recognize limitations in order that you do not make unsupported claims. Of course, this is more like a spectrum than a matter of being completely rational or being completely irrational. Rationality requires the correct uses of logic, reason and evidence. The ability to make libertarian free choices does not come into play at all. If your objection is that we would believe things because something outside of our control caused us to believe this, then yes, but even libertarians would have to believe that. After all, that something that is outside of our control is what I referred to with my example of one's belief regarding the shape of the Earth. The reasons to believe that it has shape X. In other words, even if you are a proponent of libertarian free will, then whatever we can make libertarian free decisions about, it's neither our beliefs nor our ability to use reason, logic and evidence. So, once forgiven, now free, you haven't accounted for libertarian free will using the soul, and you also fail to account for libertarian free will being a prerequisite for rationality. You need to account for the precise role libertarian free will is supposed to play in rationality and how this differs from the lack of libertarian free will in the reasoning process. Again, asserting X is not the same thing as accounting for X. By the way, I noticed the following contradiction in your video.
Are ultimately the product of the predetermined laws of nature. I mean, in a random chance universe where matter and energy is all that exists, his beliefs would be predetermined by the laws of nature. I mean, in a random chance universe where matter and energy is all that exists.
Well, I'll give you a hint. Combine the two, but without oversimplifying it.
And so if atheism is true, then you are just a complicated chunk of matter that arose from a non-rational process, and whatever you say and whatever you do, including the videos that you make, are ultimately the product of the predetermined laws of nature. You didn't reason to your conclusions, and you are not a free thinker. Everything about you, including your thoughts and your beliefs, are restricted to the predetermined laws of nature. So to claim that you are a free thinker is a contradiction to your profession of atheism. So, what does your naturalism leave you with? Here's what an article in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences states. The reality is, not only do we have no more free will than a fly or a bacterium, in actuality, we have no more free will than a bowl of sugar. This is Naturalism 101, the belief that makes knowledge impossible, the belief that makes free thinking an impossibility. Yet ironically, Thunderf00t wants to stand on this sinking sand where he is not free to think and accuse me of being wrong. The critical problem here, the blind spot in Thunderf00t's worldview, is that if atheism were true, he could not be a free thinker. His beliefs would be predetermined by the laws of nature and he couldn't help it. So here's my first question for you, Thunderf00t. If everything is governed by natural law, how can you possibly be a free thinker?
This topic is of lesser importance, but I thought I should include it because it is such a huge misunderstanding on OnceForgivenNowFree's part, bordering on a fallacy of equivocation. I don't really use the term free thinker myself, and different people may mean different things by it, But does Once Forgiven Now Free seriously believe that this label is related to some sort of metaphysical claim? I mean, seriously, the term free in free thinker is not in reference to the nature of decision making itself or in reference to the nature of how reality operates. It is used in contrast to how in a religious worldview you start with a definite conclusion that the religion is true, and all of your thinking has to be based on that unshakable foundation, limiting your views on how the world may be because the conclusion is already made for you. Free thinking means that you are not shackled by such an arbitrary foundation and are allowed to change your mind. Whereas in religion you cannot deviate from the religious text. You cannot go against it even if you believe something is true that is not in alignment with these texts. That is what being a free thinker is the opposite of. It is not related to the actual nature of decision making itself. Now, if you have something against calling oneself a free thinker, that's fine. But twisting it to mean something it doesn't, especially when Thunderf00t didn't make any comments on the nature of decision making itself anywhere in this video, I think it shows a lack of integrity. Oh, and if you want to claim that I cannot say anything about integrity because I cannot account for morality in my worldview, then I would happily discuss that topic as well, but don't forget to watch this video I made on the subject before you do.
You have wasted your life. I beseech you, as someone who has stood on top of the mountain, do not waste the rest of it.
As someone who is standing in front of a camera, I ask you, if atheism is true, isn't everything ultimately a waste? Eventually, every star will die out, as will our universe. Nothing will ultimately matter, and everything will ultimately go to waste. So who are you to tell me that my life is wasted? Besides, I happen to enjoy my life. I'm happy, I'm married, I have kids, life is great, and my faith gives me meaning. So what standard can you possibly use to determine whether my life is a waste or not? If evolution is true, then isn't our purpose to survive and reproduce so that our genes can go on to the next generation? I've done that already. Have you? Or are you an evolutionary dead end? See, religious people tend to have more children than non-believers. So maybe Christianity is the next step in human evolution. And maybe atheism is just an evolutionary leftover from our primitive past. And so I'll end with this second question for you, Thunderf00t. If atheism is true, how could I possibly be wasting my life? I mean, in a random chance universe where matter and energy is all that exists, what standard can you use to differentiate between that which is wasteful and that which has purpose and meaning? And why should my life be judged by that standard?
When it comes to wasting your life, you missed the point as well. Thunderf00t did indeed make an assumption here, but it is an assumption we all make when we engage each other in debate, especially on these type of topics. I am making the assumption that you care about whether or not your beliefs are true. Perhaps you don't, and engaging apologists often makes it difficult to hold this assumption, but I doubt that if I ask whether you do, that you would say that you do not care about whether your beliefs are true or not. Now, if you do, coupled together with how erroneous your claims are and how you fail to account for your worldview, then you would have to admit that you are wasting your life in that sense, because you waste it on a false view of the world. Especially because there is so much accumulated wisdom that did not originate from a holy book. But leaving all of that aside, let's turn your question at the end around. If Christianity is true, how can I possibly waste my life? In other words, how is this issue related to worldviews? Purpose and value are, like beauty, in the eye of the beholder. Whether there is something external imposing a purpose on your life, whether it being eternal and from a divine being, or finite and from some other source, or whether there is nothing external imposing any kind of purpose on your life, it inevitably will be you and only you who can judge the existence or lack of an external imposed purpose to be desirable or not. So whether or not a divine plan for your life exists, only your personal and subjective goals are relevant. So what I'm trying to say is that the addition of "if atheism is true" in your question is an irrelevant addition. Anyway, this segment was of way lesser importance as I said, but I had the opportunity to point it out and so I did. Now let's review the few comments Once Forgiven Now Free left on my previous video. He responded to my computer analogy and he sort of attempted to answer my question regarding the reliability of God's mind. Quote, "First, your analogy with the computers is flawed. You pose the question as an outside observer who can judge between these two computers and determine if they would work. The problem is, we don't have this outside source to judge from. We are the computer in the analogy. So it's like a computer which was not intelligently designed, using its processing power to determine if it's reliable. You conveniently shifted the focus to an outside party, the viewer, to judge." Okay, this is a very strange objection to the computer analogy, as it is in and of itself unrelated to the issue of whether my or anyone else's brain is reliable or what worldview accounts for the reliability of one's brain. In fact, even if OnceForgivenNowFree somehow convinced me and converted me to Christianity, I could still use this analogy. It holds regardless of which worldview is true. I purposefully divided my video into subsections to address specific points. This analogy was to demonstrate that the origin of an entity is ultimately irrelevant in regards to its abilities and reliability. What matters is whether or not the entity has those abilities, which in the case of a computer depends on the specific configuration of particles of which it is composed. OnceForgivenNowFree is objecting to something that is addressed at other points in the video. It's not a valid response to this analogy as it does not address it to begin with. OnceForgivenNowFree simply repeated the very objection that the entirety of the video was a response to. And this was the second comment. Quote, "To answer your question at the end, God is eternal, as I'm sure you know. Is his mind reliable? It's the same answer as always. Well, sort of anyway. If we assume that God's mind is irrational, then we are the product of an irrational mind, which means we can't trust our own minds. That would be self-refuting, so it's illogical to believe that. It would be self-defeating. And so that is why I don't believe that his mind is irrational." OnceForgivenNowFree makes 2 points here, and neither point answers my question. The first point is that God is eternal. Well, I understand that you believe that, but it's not the issue. Unless you can demonstrate some sort of relation between eternality and rationality, it's merely a red herring and it does not address the question. Your second point was directly addressed earlier on in the video. You misunderstand your own methodology. The transcendental method is not about what you assume, but about what must be true in order for X to be true, in this case the reliability of our minds. In the way you present it, your claim is no different than if I claimed that evolution just happened to bring forth reliable brains, and if you ask why, I would answer that I just need to assume that because if I didn't, I couldn't trust my own brain. You wouldn't accept that because that's merely an assertion and not something that accounts for rationality. And in the same way, your answer is not an account either. Neither does it answer my question. I understand that you believe that God's mind is rational. I specifically stated that in your worldview he is the ultimate rational being. The issue was not even about that belief itself, but its relation to your claim that we require intelligently designed brains, when the ultimate rational being in your worldview doesn't have a brain in the first place and is not intelligently designed. I was not pointing towards a contradiction in your worldview per se, but a contradiction in the reasoning behind your argument. So my original questions still stand. Now let's add some new ones based on what I explained in this video. Question 1. Why do you claim that, if atheism, or rather physicalism, is true, and our brains are the result of natural selection, that our actual beliefs are the result of natural selection? And yes, you did mention individual beliefs, like the belief in a god. When you know this to be a straw man, if you rejected this claim as a straw man, then what defense do you have for this claim, since you haven't offered any? Question 2. Apart from free will, which functions, if any, does the soul add to the brain? Would a hypothetical soulless brain merely be irrational due to the lack of free will, meaning that the soul by itself is not capable of rational thought? Or is the soul itself capable of rational thought? If the latter is the case, why does brain damage affect perception, memory, personality, awareness, and the very act of thinking itself, which are all prerequisites for rationality? Question 3. What role could libertarian free will possibly play in rational thinking and the acquirement, assessment, and correction of beliefs, when none of these things are based on choices in the first place? If your objection is that without free will we have no control over what we believe and why we believe it, then could you explain how the existence of free will would actually change that fact? And question 4. Given that indeterminism may be a prerequisite for libertarian free will, but is not sufficient to account for it, and given that predetermining factors of chemistry and the laws of physics only play a very minor part in the case against libertarian free will, how is the supposed addition of a soul which transcends those specific determining factors any more than a red herring? How does it even come close to accounting for free will and rationality in your worldview?
Thanks for watching. I know that these are difficult questions, Thunderfoot, but I hope that you'll answer them. I hope you don't just run away and ignore it because these happen to be some inconvenient questions for you. Let it be known that me, as a Christian, want to have this discussion. I want to understand your atheistic worldview. Please enlighten us Christians. This should be easy for you, right? You've got a 40-part series on why people laugh at creationists. So please, Thunderfoot, explain to me why my questions are laughable.
Well, I'm not Thunderfoot, but you posed your challenge to any atheist. I have answered your so-called difficult questions, and if you disagree with my answers, I would like to know why. And if you truly desire a dialogue, then shouldn't you be willing to answer some questions as well? You claim that an atheistic worldview, which in my case would be metaphysical naturalism, cannot account for rationality, whereas Christianity can. But apart from assertions and a misapplication or probably misunderstanding of your very own methodology, the transcendental method, I haven't seen any such account from your end. Which in my humble opinion is not very rational.